on your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock, Israel has rejected the suggestion of a deeper incursion into Syria as it strikes army bases close to the border. The military has denied claims its tanks are now close to the capital Damascus following the collapse of the Assad regime. It insists its forces remain inside the buffer zone. Middle East security expert at the Atlantic Council, Kirsten Fontenrose, has told LBC they're protecting their interests.
Israel is saying we have been struck from within Syria so frequently, this is a continuation, and we have to do this for our own defence.
Former England international rugby player Tom Voice is believed to have died during Storm Dara. Police say the 43-year-old is suspected to have been pulled away in the current of a river in his car on Sunday night in Northumberland. Cineworld says it will shut another 6 of its cinemas following a major restructuring process. It hasn't revealed how many jobs will be impacted by the closures. And the RSPCA has welcomed New Zealand's proposal to end greyhound racing and is calling for England and Wales to follow suit. The New Zealand government says the sport has an unacceptably high rate of injuries and maltreatment. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed down 72 points at 82.79. The pound buys $1.21 and €1.21. LBC weather: cloudy in much of England and Wales tonight, but largely clear for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Showers in the far southwest, Channel Isles and Shetland, and a low of -7. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Daryl Jackson.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening. 2 minutes past 8. Welcome to Tuesday's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. On the panel with me, Natalie Bennett, Baroness Natalie Bennett, sitting to my left, Green Party peer, former Green Party leader. To her left, Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP for Herne Bay and Sandwich. To my right, Henry Riley, LBC presenter and reporter. Or is it reporter and presenter? I don't know.
Probably that way round.
And Kevin Craig, founder and chief executive of the public relations agency PLMR. He was a Labour candidate in July's general election. You can get in touch with us in all sorts of ways. You can phone 0345 6060 973. You can WhatsApp your question on the same number. You can text 84850 and you can say, Alexa, send a comment to LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Right, let's start with a WhatsApp question from Vaz in Warwick. What does the regime change in Syria mean for the Middle East, and what will this mean for the UK? Quite a broad question there. Sir Roger Gale.
It's a very, very dangerous situation. There is absolutely no doubt in most people's minds that Assad going was a good thing. He was a tyrant, he was brutal, he was a murderer, one of the most unpleasant people whose life would inevitably have been enhanced by death. But that said, there's a vacuum, and what happens now? And I think the world is now waiting to see what happens now. I was listening to Alex Younger, the former director of MI6, yesterday, who probably knows more about this subject than most of us, says it is a very, very dangerous situation. It could go wonderfully the right way. It could go horribly wrong. History sadly suggests that there's a fair chance it might go horribly wrong.
Do you think, though, the international community can't just sit and watch? It has to somehow, and don't ask me how, but somehow get involved and provide support to whatever the new Syrian regime turns out to be.
Well, let me toss that back at you. I am going to ask you how, because it's all very well. It's all very well saying do something. People out there are saying do something. It's not just a question of doing something. You've got to do the right thing. And up until now, the Western world has not had a particularly good track record of doing the right thing in the Middle East.
Natalie Bennett.
Well, I very much agree with the track record. We have not done the right thing, and we know what the wrong thing is, which is backing dictators who've oppressed their own people. I mean, this question starts with what does it mean for the Middle East? But I think the first question has to be what does it mean for the people of Syria? And they have been through decades of hideous oppression. They've been through an internal conflict. You know, I was in Aleppo in 1999. It was one of my favourite cities in the world. It's now essentially rubble. And so, you know, I think of the people I met then, what their lives have been like. And, of course, we're going to have malign actors, Iran, Russia, trying to manoeuvre things for their own ends. You know, they've just been effectively defeated. What's really crucial for us is not to make the mistake we've made again and again, as Sir Roger said, of making the wrong choices. So that means we've got to support democracy, the rule of law, a feminist foreign policy that says let's make sure the women have a say and support those kind of forces. And just to finally disagree with Sir Roger about history being negative, the story I've been citing a lot recently was I was in Finland, in Tampere, which is their second city. And now I confess that I didn't know very much about Finnish history in detail, but what we call as the First World War, they call the war between the Reds and the Whites. And the photos from that war, there were atrocities there that immediately reminded me of covering as a journalist the Rwandan genocide. That was Finland not much more than 100 years ago. It's now one of the most stable, secure, most effective societies in the world. So it is possible to start from a very bad place and make things better. And it's important to say that and not be too negative and try and support the right kind of forces.
Kevin Craig.
Well, I would love to share Natalie's optimism. I am worried about the developments there, and the end of the Assad regime is a good thing, but I would support the idea of a country that was supportive of women and women's rights would be wonderful. I'm very worried about the new, well, it's obviously not elected yet, the regime, but some of their early indicators where they stand on women's issues. And I think our ability to intervene as a country is somewhat limited, really, and we just have to see this initial period and see how it plays out. But it's a very nervous time. And we haven't done very well intervening in that area of the world in recent years. So I think our powers to make a difference are somewhat limited. Encourage it if there's any sign that democracy might follow, that would be wonderful. But some of the early noises that I've seen in the last 48 hours are quite worrying.
Someone suggested yesterday on the programme that it should be for the Arab League to involve itself in this sort of, it shouldn't be Western countries, it should be for the region to help a new government develop. Until it was then pointed out that, of course, this is the same Arab League that invited Bashar al-Assad to its last meeting 2 months ago. I mean, talk about bad timing. Yeah. So it'd be quite difficult for that to happen, I guess.
It would be, but there's so much compromise and, to the purest side, hypocrisy involved around Middle East politics. Our own record as a nation, particularly from the time of Balfour, makes it very difficult for us to intervene successfully there. And I think our own government's taken a quick decision on accepting asylum applications, I think, which has been very interesting domestically, but we can but hope.
Henry Riley, I'm quite interested in your perspective as a younger person, because, I mean, we talk about all of the foreign policy defeats that the West has had in the last 20 years. Do you approach this from a different perspective? Because, I mean, you would have been a child when most of this was going on. I don't say it in a patronising way. I hope I don't sound patronising, but I think you just have a different perspective probably to anyone else on the panel.
I think so, but I do share a lot of the comments that have been made so far with regards to the UK's approach in the Middle East for some time. I think in terms of the second part of the question, what it means for the UK, I think perhaps not enough is being focused on the Syrian asylum seekers who are here in the UK at the moment. And we know that the Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has paused those asylum applications at the moment. And I do feel at a time when you have Syrians living in the UK, people who are doctors, people who are business owners, people who have built a life here and settled here. The idea of returning to Syria instantaneously is completely implausible. I mean, these people will be walking the streets where friends and family have been killed, injured by chemical weapons, by a brutal dictator. And I do think we're being slightly, I worry that the government is being slightly too sort of formulaic in its response and sort of looking at the details on paper without any emotional connection there, because a lot of these people who are in the UK, of course, if they want to return to Syria, and many will eventually when places aren't effectively rubbled, then of course. But the idea of cutting off people's asylum claims at the moment, I do find difficult to stomach.
Let's take a follow-up question from Ben in Clacton. Hello, Ben.
Hello, Ian, and good evening, panel. When are we going to stop calling the Israelis' attacks on other countries acts of self-defence?
So are you referring to the Israeli attacks on Syria over the last 48 hours here?
Yes.
That is an interesting question. We were talking about it in the last hour, Natalie, and the Israeli defences, we want to make sure that whatever regime takes over, they're not in a position to attack us in the way that we felt that Syria was at least a conduit for attacks before.
Well, I'm not an international human rights lawyer, but that is an argument that, to me, does not stack up at all. And I think, in the Green Party, we've been saying for a very long time that what Israel is doing in its neighbouring countries and in Gaza is unacceptable, and we should stop selling them arms. But if they've been
bombing Assad's chemical weapons stockpiles and destroying them, surely that's a good thing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I put down a written question to the government this morning on this very issue, because you don't just magically destroy chemical weapons. I think I've asked the government what they know about this and what the environmental impacts are, because you throw a whole lot of high explosives on the top of chemical weapons. That doesn't mean they suddenly disappear in a puff of magic. Those chemicals are going to be scattered out into the environment. Those chemicals are going to impact on people. They're going to impact on the environment potentially for very long periods of time. That, if you were going to destroy the chemical weapons, that's not the way you would do it.
Well, I have no idea whether it's the way you do it. I mean, sometimes if you do bomb something into smithereens, that is the way you do it. Whether it is in this case, I don't know. All right, well, let's say they sent in Mossad people to disable these weapons somehow.
Well, we still have the human rights law. We're saying that...
How does the human rights law come into that?
Well, international law, invading another country, taking, another country, even if the country's in turmoil, we are saying Russia, has broken international law by invading Ukraine.
So to disable illegal chemical weapons, you think that would be a bad thing?
Well, I think it's a case of proper processes. By all means, send the UN...
Isn't this where the West is starting to have a lack of moral courage here? Sometimes you have to do the right thing, and destroying chemical weapons, however it's done, is the right thing.
I just don't think we don't know whether they have been destroyed. I do not... I've got a science degree going back. I don't think it's possible to know that.
Henry.
I'm asking.
Well, I think in terms of the relationship between Israel and Syria, we know for some time that it's been used as a proxy, many of those demilitarised zones, in terms of allowing Hezbollah to effectively get weapons, with Iran allowing that. So I do think that Israel acting now while the iron is hot is somewhat understandable. I understand why they're doing it. It's a country that obviously has extreme levels of instability, Syria, and so doing it now at a point where the dictator has just gone and you're at a point where you can probably strike, and obviously the rebel groups haven't even formed any sort of semblance of government at the moment. They're spending their time in sort of Assad's garage, driving his Ferraris, if you look at some of the videos that were surfing on social media. So they're not a serious government at the moment. They're far from that. And the idea that Israel is moving into Syria and exploiting that, and I think you have to be careful. The IDF are denying that they're in Damascus, but I know Reuters are saying that they are in parts of it. So I think it's pretty unclear at the moment, but I tend to agree with you, Ian, in terms of chemical weapons and Assad. The idea that if you can destroy them and you're a country like Israel that is surrounded by enemies, I think it is understandable.
Kevin?
I entirely echo that, and I think to go back to the very fair question by the listener, my view would be that, Israel, the only democracy in that region, Israel is our ally. They are a country that underwent existential threat and attack with the massacres that happened in October last year. It is entirely understandable that they want to use the current moment to do good. I define good as destroying chemical weapons. I don't believe Israel would ever... They're not a country that would use chemical weapons. And I believe that in all these debates, we have to remember they are a friend of this country and our values, and nobody supports the loss of a single innocent life in the Middle East and the horrors on all sides recently. But the context is the only democracy in that part of the world underwent horrific attacks in October last year, which are, in my view, too often swept under the carpet in these debates.
Roger.
I may be in a minority of one on this, and I can almost hear people throwing bricks at the radio now. But Netanyahu's position has become so incendiary that if what we are looking for is peace in Syria and a peaceful transition in Syria and the establishment of a democratic, all-embracing regime in Syria, then I'm not sure that his intervention is likely to be in any way helpful at all. You asked me earlier, shouldn't we be doing something? Yes, of course we have to do something about potential chemical weapons stockpiles. That again is another danger. But there I think we do have a role to play, and it should be us that's doing it, not Netanyahu acting unilaterally.
Okay. Ben, thank you for that question. We'll move on to something else in just a few minutes' time. It's 8:15.
LBC. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross question with Iain Dale. Alexa, send a comment to LBC.
With me in the studio, Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP for Herne Bay and Sandwich. Used to be North Thanet. Were you a bit annoyed when they changed the name?
Well, I lost Margate, and I was very fond of Margate. And what they've done is created an idiotic donut around the three Thanet towns. And one of only, I think I'm right in saying, I'm one of only two constituencies in the country that has both a north coast and a south coast, which is going some. The other one, I think I'm right in saying, is Land's End. But I've got the North Sea coast, and then I've got the Channel coast. And I've got this donut, and it's very big geographically. It's the same number of people, but it's very big geographically. And there's nothing in common, other than a lot of very nice people, between Herne Bay and Sandwich. But then when I first took the seat in 1983, and it was called North Thanet, there wasn't much in common between Margate and Herne Bay either, so we just have to put up with what the Boundary Commission inflicts upon us, Ian.
Which, of course, Natalie Bennett in the House of Lords doesn't have to worry about.
No, although, my position is the first thing I did after I went into the House of Lords was took up my House of Lords elections and other reforms bill up to the table office. So.
You are one of the most active members of the House of Lords, I read.
The Sunday Times did do a study, and other than ministers, I spoke, in a one-year period, I spoke more than anybody else other than ministers in the House. So there's only 2 Greens there, and, we've now got 4 MPs down in the other place. But with only 2 of us, as Greens, we always have something different, independent Green philosophy to bring to the debate. So we try and cover as much ground as Jenny Jones and myself as we can.
And Henry Riley likes to bring something to the debate too. When is your regular show?
Well, you might not be awake, Ian. It's 4 till 7 a.m. on a Sunday.
I've never listened.
But I'm covering you in a few weeks, so there we go. More people listening.
And Kevin Craig is from PLMR, which stands for?
Political lobbying and media relations, it's a business I established 18 years ago. We now employ 100 people across the country.
That's when you could use the word lobbying without people saying, it's a disgraceful activity.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of good lobbying that goes on, Ian. I mean, one of the things, let's say, I'm most proud of is that it was my team that worked with Cancer Research UK, and cigarette packets are now in plain packaging. We did that. Less kids
Still
smoke.
Think that was ridiculous, but
less kids smoke.
Let's not have that debate unless someone wants to ring in with a question on it. 0345 6060 973. That's what Robbie in Chelmsford has done. Hello, Robbie.
My question is, by definition, austerity aims to reduce government budget deficit through spending cuts, tax increase, or a combination of the two. With the recent budget tax increases in the news today, the public sector pay rises will have to be found within existing budgets. Is this change or just more austerity?
So Rachel Reeves is demanding 5% spending cuts from all government departments as part of her upcoming spending review. It seems to me as though Rachel Reeves is modelling herself on George Osborne, Kevin Craig. Am I being unfair?
I would say that's an inaccurate comment from my point of view. I think what the Chancellor's doing is very necessary, but it doesn't have that hard edge of austerity in terms of thinking about when I was a councillor for 18 years. I think back to 2010, where local government budgets they're over 30% down on that time. It's a really difficult time in local government. What she's doing is quite sensible, outlining the government's 6 areas of priority. We all know what those are, but everywhere else is up for grabs.
Priority, foundation, milestone,
missions, etc. But I just call them priority areas because it's a language that other people speak. And
so Keir Starmer's speaking a language that other people don't speak.
No, I'm just saying it's good to make it clear and understandable. And I think that
like a true PR professional.
I think that the chancellors, people don't like waste. They don't like it, and they think governments of all colours, they want to see their money being spent properly. And so I'm very supportive. I think there is more of a focus in this government on people in poverty, and that's where
by cutting their winter fuel allowance.
Well, you see, Ian, I think that was just a comms issue, to be honest. I do.
9 million people have lost their benefit.
Yeah, but do you know what? If the government had done it in a different order and let the increases to the pension kick in, and if that was why people got so worried. I think people of all parties would agree, there is a lot of pensioners getting the winter fuel allowance who didn't need it, and the increases in pensions mean that if you did it in a different order, you wouldn't have had this backlash.
And the 2-child benefit cap?
Well, I mean,
to be fair, they didn't introduce that.
But taking it away is something that lots of Labour MPs are campaigning for.
They would like to, but regrettably, you can't do everything. And I think one of the big things about the current government is this is early days, and there is it is 5 months into after 14 years out of power. You're not going to fix it overnight.
So why is child poverty not a priority, not a mission, not a whatever you want to call it?
It's a huge priority, and the areas that the government are focusing on, living standards, schools, NHS, environment, crime, are all ones that affect people at the poorest end of society. And one of the things that was restated last week is that if this government hasn't improved people's disposable incomes at the next election, it doesn't expect to get re-elected. And it is an issue, but I know that you're right, Natalie, people want to do more quickly.
I haven't commented because I'm not often speechless, Ian, but I'm practically speechless, having heard what Kevin has to say.
Try and fight the urge.
This is a Chancellor of the Exchequer who, first of all, within days of taking office, made the monumental blunder over winter fuel allowance. If the Labour government gets enough people to sign up to pension credit to mitigate it, they will wipe out overnight any of the savings that Rachel Reeves might have made by cutting winter fuel allowance. Where on earth is the sense in that equation? That's on day 3. Then we go forward from there, and by now, other than during the global pandemic, when global business effectively shut, the economy is in the worst state that it has ever been, and business confidence is at an all-time low, agricultural confidence is at an all-time low, family businesses are tearing their hair, and nobody can see a future. Now, I'm not saying that we didn't make mistakes, because by God we did.
That is true.
And I'm not going to try and pretend that overnight suddenly everybody, were there to be an election tomorrow, would just turn around and say, well, Labour screwed it up, which they have, and we love you. But compared with what we were doing and compared with what is being done by now, this is what I think is known in technical terms as a rocking disaster.
I wondered what you were going to say there, Roger, but being a seasoned broadcaster, you saved yourself. Natalie?
Well, I have to agree with Roger, and you look at what the public view is.
That's the second time in 2 questions.
There you go. It happens.
Stop it.
But, that's because we're saying that what we're reflecting is reflecting what the public view, what the polls show, that the government is severely disappointing the public. And that's a grave concern, because there is a huge amount of distrust.
Isn't that inevitable, though? They have got right on their side to the extent that, they inherited a lot of problems, so inevitably they're going to be unpopular in the first year or two of their government.
But what they haven't done, this probably goes back to the election, and going into an election going, right, we won't promise anything, we won't do anything, we won't tell, so we're just going for the maximum number of seats, and then we don't have a plan. And the fact that they haven't said this is what the society is going to look like, this is what we're going to do. As the Green Party, we've been calling right through the election, saying, cutting government services, and I think, Robbie, going back to Robbie, is absolutely right. This is austerity. That this is a choice. And you were saying that schools are a real priority. This morning, one of the examples the government was giving of what they plan to cut is a $6.5 million scheme to put social workers into schools. Now, they're saying, that's it doesn't show and demonstrated effects. But what's going to happen if you take those social workers out? I used to be a school governor. We had a deputy head teacher who spent most of her time doing social work. If you... The problems those people are dealing with are not going to disappear. The school's going to have to pick up the slack.
Okay, so I was also a school governor for many years, like you, with a mother-in-law who was a social worker, and that is a very good example. I'm glad you pulled it out, because social workers in schools, they analysed it. There were no measurable impacts to have found to have been made. But if you invest in schools, if you pay teachers more, if you respect the profession, if you fix school buildings, that will make a difference. If you ensure that the kids who need support in the early mornings get it, that will make a difference. There are lots of schemes that happen in government where the Labour government is saying, well, no, we don't believe in it. And Roger, if I can come back to you, it's a lot easier to sleep at night when your Chancellor and your Prime Minister don't introduce budgets that send the mortgage of an average person up by hundreds of pounds overnight. And that was the legacy that we were dealing with.
No, that was one bit of the legacy.
But it's all part of it.
No, it was one bit of the legacy. And you can't go on dining off the Liz Truss mistake.
Why not? Because you dined off the winter of discontent for at least 10 years back in the 80s.
Your party made
We'll be dining off this for a very long time indeed. But look, Iain, I'm sorry, we're talking about children's hospices having to lay off staff because of the national insurance increase. We're talking about carers being cut because of the national insurance increase. We're talking about doctors' surgeries laying off staff because of the national insurance increase. Where is the benefit to the public in this? There is none. I'm sorry.
But
Kevin,
what about the huge injections of spending investment in the NHS and schools that have been announced?
Why are all these people being laid off then?
Well, there are the national insurance rises, I heard Wes Streeting say very recently he was going to specifically look at what you absolutely raised, is the hospices, and there's going to be an announcement made before Christmas about that.
Okay, Henry Riley.
Specifically.
Well, I think in terms of the national insurance contributions, the government have said they're going to cover it for police officers. It's very difficult to say that for one profession and then not to do it across the board. So I do think the comms on that, as Kevin was saying, has been a bit of a disaster, to be honest. In terms of the comms surrounding the winter fuel allowance being cut, the fact that you're uniting Baroness Bennett and Nigel Farage, Kemi Badenoch and Sir Ed Davey, it's been a complete disaster. And you go into an election with a manifesto that is threadbare, then don't be expected to be hit around the head with unpopular policies. You have to lay the groundwork. Labour were ahead in the polls. They could have laid this groundwork for some time. On the sort of crux of the question about sort of cuts in government and about efficiency savings, we're speaking on the day when we learned the culture department spent £1,200 on 2 ring binders. I mean, it's extraordinary. I don't think it was Lisa Nandy who sort of sanctioned it herself, but they've spent £600.
That's quite an achievement.
It's incredible. And in the House of Commons shop, by the way, I was checking, they're £29.99, and they're very nice leather ones. So, of course, there is waste in government on an almost industrial scale. In terms of sort of management consultants, of course, cuts can be made. I don't begrudge Rachel Reeves for going after this at all, actually. You look at Francis Maud, when he was looking at efficiency savings in I think it was 2010 to 2014, he saved £14 billion. So there are savings to be made in government. Boris Johnson pledged to scrap 91,000 civil servants, you remember, and then and that was back at the last spending review in 2021. Since then, there's been 38,000 more civil servants put into the general scheme. So I don't think it's as easy as making a sort of tinkering around the edges. Having said that, though, I think there are cuts to be made, and cuts that don't necessarily impact on sort of redundancies of civil servants, for example.
OK, well, that's an interesting debate. Robbie, thank you for that question. We'll come on to something else we're going to talk about Reform UK in just a moment. It's 8:30 on LBC. Daryl Jackson has the news headlines.
Israel's defence minister says the country intends to establish a demilitarised zone in southern Syria as its tanks draw closer to the capital. The Israeli military has carried out a wave of heavy airstrikes on the border, but reports suggest its troops are now within 15 miles of Damascus. Former England rugby player Tom Voice is believed to have died after being swept away during Storm Dara. It's thought the 43-year-old tried to cross a river in Northumberland in his car on Saturday evening. And the Kings presented medals to the families of former firefighters, police officers and other public servants who've died in the line of duty. 38 people have become the first to be recognised with Elizabeth emblems. LBC weather: cloudy in much of England and Wales tonight, but largely clear for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Showers in the far southwest, Channel Islands and Shetland, and a low of -7.
This is LBC.
Hey, Harry.
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
8:33 on LBC. Sir Roger Gale is with us, Conservative MP for Herne Bay and Sandwich, née North Thanet. Baroness Natalie Bennett is here, Green Party peer. Kevin Craig from the public relations agency PLMR, Labour candidate at the last election, and Henry Riley, LBC presenter and reporter. Pauline in Dagenham has asked this question. The Metropolitan Police Chief says they'll have to get rid of more than 2,000 officers next year because the force hasn't got enough money to pay for them. How are we going to keep the streets safe with even fewer police patrolling them? There's a £450 million shortfall. Sadiq Khan is in charge of the budget and is presumably getting a knighthood for shortchanging the Metropolitan Police, he said controversially. Henry Riley.
Well, the budget is, I think, 3/4 Home Office, 1/4 City Hall in terms of the Met Police. But this from the government, I think, is a massive mistake. There was a poll out a few days ago saying that 42% of Londoners, if we're talking about the Met specifically, didn't feel safe on their streets at night. That's a huge number. And if you want to build confidence, and also, I mean, you know, during the general election campaign, you had Labour going constantly after sort of officer numbers being cut during the period that the Conservatives were in office. The timing of it, again, I mean, Kevin was talking about comms earlier, is bizarre. Yvette Cooper spent the whole of last week talking about an uplift of 13,000 officers. And now we learn that the Met Police are going to have to lay off 2,300 officers, which is what Sir Mark Rowley said, 400 staff. Police stations across London, but also across the UK, have been closing for some time. If you want to raise money for the police, the thing that I've been banging on about for some time is the Premier League. The Metropolitan Police spends £19 million every year policing Premier League football matches. These clubs have huge profits. They're owned by governments in some cases. They do, well, maybe not West Ham, but
No, West Ham is the only one in profit, but all the others lose money every year.
All I would say is, if you're buying a defender, it's significantly more expensive than £19 million. And plus, this is not an expense that the Metropolitan Police is sort of putting on. I mean, I think it's ridiculous personally, but Labour's missions that they were talking about in terms of crime, halving instances of knife crime, halving instances of violence against women and girls, it seems to me inconceivable that they're doing that at a time where they're also asking forces like the Met, the biggest in the country, to make these huge scale backs. For me, it's another comms disaster, but also practically, that is not going to restore confidence in the police.
Fiona says, Ian, why don't you mention Gavin Williamson's honour? You never complain about that. Well, it was about 3 years ago, and I do seem to remember at the time questioning it, shall we say. Kevin Craig.
Well, I would just say I would be flabbergasted if it comes to pass that the week after the Prime Minister is speaking to the country, talking about a named police officer in every locality at the same time, and I know all of us on this panel will agree with the fears on crime that people have in London and elsewhere. I will be flabbergasted if it comes to pass that we're going to lose this number of police officers. I cannot see how that will be allowed to happen, and I don't see how that works at the moment, because it makes no sense whatsoever. And crime is one of the 6 priority areas. So I imagine that if there's a serious possibility of the number of police officers being lost in London, you're going to see a lot of Labour MPs in London working very hard to see that doesn't happen.
Roger.
I'm one of relatively few members of Parliament, if not now the only member of Parliament, I think, that's worn a police uniform. With the British Transport Police, with the British British Transport Police in London, and it was a very interesting experience. I did it while I was a member of Parliament, and I did it for 3 years.
There is another one, Louise Haigh.
Has she?
Yep.
Lambeth.
And then I'm not the only one, and all part of her. It was an interesting experience. London's not easy to police. Everybody trying to do the job knows that, whether they're in the Met or the BTP on the London Underground. It's a huge challenge. For Mayor Khan to claim that he has somehow delivered on policing while presiding over, again, one of the biggest shambles in the police force in the country, I think is unbelievable. My local police and crime commissioner, Matthew Scott in Kent, has re-recruited a significant number of police officers. He's found the money to do it. I am very proud indeed of the Kent Police Force. I think they're doing a good job. Yes, of course they're stretched. Of course they'd like more resources. Every police force in the country would. But they are doing a good job because the Police and Crime Commissioner in Kent is behind them. Where is Mayor Khan behind his force?
But it's not just about London, is it? Because I think, Henry, you were reporting on this earlier, isn't Norfolk saying that they're going to have to shed officers as well? So this is going to be a domino effect, I suspect.
10 police forces have written to the Home Secretary on this, yeah.
Forgive me, because I ought to know and I don't. I trust Kent isn't one of them.
I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't think it is.
Natalie.
Well, I think what we've just seen, the discussion, we have such a problem with the quality of governance, the lack of stability in policy. At the former government, got rid of 20,000 police officers and then found they had to restore them, to bring them back again. You lose senior experienced people, and then mostly you end up recruiting young inexperienced people, and they've got to build up the experience again. And this seesaw, this uncertainty, the instability of the whole way of our system is working. We have a broken system. Our politics is broken, our systems of governance are broken, and this is just one of the examples where we're not giving this kind of stability that enables our institutions to function properly. Similar thing has happened in the prisons. The former government absolutely slashed the number of prison officers, lost lots of experienced people, and then they've really been struggling to keep control of the prisons. Of course, there's also far too many people in prison. That's another story. But we have a real problem of not being able to stick with solid, stable policies that give people the chance to know where they're going in their own individual lives.
I think that's very fair, and I think it is, and Roger won't like this, I think it's because the last lot cocked up so badly on prisons and police numbers and crime overall. I cannot see how this number of officers will be allowed to be reduced in the Met in the short term. Politically, it is just not feasible.
Let me read you out a text I've just had from Joe, who says, I'm a former police officer. Whenever you hear top brass threatening to cut policing numbers because they've made all the efficiency savings possible, remind your listeners that we have 48 police forces in the UK. Each one of them has its own unique, non-standardised uniform, logistics and procurement operations. The one attempt made in 2011 to rationalise this, brackets NUMS, failed after only 2 forces signed up. I'm not procurement. That is a major issue in all sorts of government departments, but I must admit I didn't know that was the case here. Very interesting question, Pauline. Thank you for asking it. Now, Joshua in Birmingham is on the line. Joshua, hi. What would you like to ask?
Evening, Ian. Can I just say one very quick thing? I'm a massive fan, and it's such a deep shame that your podcast For the Many has ended, because you and Jackie accompanied me on many walks and many runs. So that's one thing I just wanted to say. I'm a massive fan.
Well, let me give you some good news, Joshua, because a new podcast will be starting in January. Not a new For the Many, but it will have the same sort of vibe. I can't tell you who I'm going to do it with yet, but I think you'll enjoy it. Anyway, what's your question?
Yeah, fantastic. I hope when you say vibe, I hope you mean wit. But the question, so Reform have had some influential defections recently. Can the party sustain its momentum into the next general election? And seen as Nigel Farage has today welcomed a billionaire former Conservative donor in Nick Candy, is the party, the Reform Party, simply the party for the wealthy?
Well, Nick, all parties have treasurers who are very wealthy.
Not quite all.
Most serious parties.
They're not a very good treasurer.
The fast advancing ones don't.
So Nick Candy, he's a billionaire property developer, a very successful business career. He's been announced as Reform's new treasurer today. He's attempting to secure more donations for Nigel Farage's party and has pledged to donate a seven-figure sum of his own cash as well. And Farage has denied claims today that Reform is becoming a party of and for millionaires. I've written a piece on Mr. Candy for the iNewspaper tomorrow, which you may like to read over your morning.
Are you a fan of his, Ian?
I don't know him, but he is married to Holly Valance, and I think they're the new political power couple. Where should we start here? Let's start with Natalie.
Well, I think, first of all, to answer the question, I think it's very likely that before the next election, either the Tory party will fold into Reform or Reform will fold into the Tory party. The Tory party has been chasing Reform voters, and that's the direction of travel. So it's kind of which way that goes probably doesn't make a great deal of difference. But I think one of the things that this story raises is the place of big money in politics. And we saw a story very recently suggesting that Elon Musk might buy the prime ministership of the UK for Farage. I actually had an exchange in the Elections Bill Now Act with Earl Howe, who was for the government, and I said, shouldn't there be a maximum percentage that someone should be able to fund a political party or an election campaign.
Percentage of what?
Percentage of the total spend. So should one person be able to buy a seat or an election or a government? The Earl Howe said it was highly hypothetical. Well, it's not hypothetical anymore. And more than that, it's a question of, Earl Howe did acknowledge that at first he thought this was a bad idea. And I think the country thinks this is a bad idea. We have to get the big money out of politics. People cannot be able to buy election results, cannot be able to buy parties.
Roger.
Before the last 3 elections, each of them, I said that I did not wish to be elected with the support of anybody who shared the views of Nigel Farage. And I meant it. And on election night this time, although my majority was slashed from, it was a new seat, but a theoretical 18,500 to 2,500, I was able to say, when I accepted the seat, that I was not there because of the support of Nigel Farage or his followers. That is how strongly I feel about him. I think the man is a populist. I think he has got nothing to offer. I said, some will not like this, but it will be recalled that I said of Mr. Johnson, and it's there in the House of Commons on the record, my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has got a solution. What's yours? I say the same to Mr. Farage. He has no solution. He's very good at offering criticism. He has not come up with a single answer to small boats, to the economy, to education, to health, or to anything else. Mr. Tice is a different matter altogether. I think he's a very efficient, a very able politician.
Do you think your parties will ever merge, Roger?
No. Well, let me put it this way. Over my dead body, to which the answer is, of course, that can be arranged.
Kevin.
I don't know what am I answering now. I'm just enjoying that.
You're answering the question.
Well, I think
Would you like me to repeat it?
Yes, please, Ian.
Right,
when you're listening to others,
the question is Reform UK only a party for the wealthy?
Ah, that's right. Well, it clearly isn't in terms of who votes for them. So one of the things I observed in this general election, where I was very active in 2 constituencies, one in Ipswich and one in Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, was a lot of Reform voters are not wealthy people, and they are attracted by the simplicity and often elegance of the arguments put forward by Nigel Farage et al. So it's not a party for the wealthy in terms of who votes for it. I just based that on my own experience campaigning. And if they're to continue succeeding, it can't just be wealthy people to vote for them. And if you look at the seats they won this time, that was not based. I mean, some of those areas are quite deprived socially and economically. And the interesting thing, I think, from somebody who's a Labour supporting business person, is that Reform are not just a challenge for Roger's party, they're a massive challenge for the Labour Party.
Well, I'm told that Downing Street strategists are obsessed by Reform, and they're really worried about the threat to Labour from Reform, I think more so in a sense than the Conservatives are.
Yeah, and I've no doubt that's true, and I think there was more colourful language used this week by someone in the parliamentary lobby, because elections are always won, aren't they, by who's trying to talk most convincingly about the future. And whether we like it or not, I don't think there's a huge love for Nigel and et al. Around this table. Maybe Richard Tice you're more impressed with, Roger, but they have a lot of energy and momentum. And when I looked at the Tory and Reform activists at the last election, there was more energy and more of a buzz around the Reform lot when I saw them out. And I think that's an interesting challenge for your party.
Henry.
Well, I spent election night in Clacton, where Nigel Farage
You get all the good gigs,
I get all the
don't
good
you?
gigs. Where
Did you take that as a sign that you're on your way out?
No, I was very nice. I spent a bit of time on the pier. Nigel Farage was in a restaurant called the Big Fat Greek, I think, as the results came in. But I was actually at the count, and I was with Reform activists, and I think the exit poll had them at substantially more seats than they got. I think it was something like 15. They ended up getting 5. I think they're a huge threat to Labour and the Conservatives. They came second in 98 seats, some of those Tories, but many of those Labour seats. And I do think, Nick Candy is not, he endorsed Keir Starmer during the general election. He's not some sort of right-wing headbanger who only sort of donates to the Conservatives. I have never met Holly
Well,
Flans.
I've never met her either, but I've read a few things that she's said.
But I think the point of Nick Candy is, look, he's someone who's endorsed Keir Starmer and has now gone to Reform. You've got Sir John Hall, the former chairman of Newcastle, who's now throwing money behind Reform. He endorsed Robert Jenrick in the Tory leadership election. So they're getting a lot of money from all angles. If you saw Twitter today, Nigel Farage had an exchange with Elon Musk on there, where Elon Musk replied to one of his tweets saying, "When's your next electoral test?" And Nigel Farage said, "Well, it's the local elections in May." So I think it's definitely on the cards that Elon Musk could donate a substantial amount of money to Reform UK. I was at you talk about me getting the best gigs. I was at the unveiling of Dame Andrea Jenkins at a very plush hotel in Mayfair.
What I would have given to be at that.
I know. But I was there, and there were a lot of media there. But there was a handful of Reform members there. And to say the reaction was lukewarm would be an understatement. You sort of recall the Douglas Carswell days when he defected to UKIP in this big conference, big fanfare. It was a massive damp squib. The only defection I can see from their point of view, which could be likely and could be significant, rather than respectfully to Dame Andrea Jenkins, a Conservatives who got roundly beaten at the last election, someone like Suella Braverman. I do think that would be Braverman. Although I was hearing her Rachel Johnson the other day. I think you can say both.
Yeah, no. But she told me she regretted saying that.
Oh, did she? Right. Well, Suella Braverman. If they can get Suella Braverman over the line, and I know her husband has defected as well, then I do think that would be very significant.
Henry, can you tell me a single one Reform policy on any subject? Not an aim, but a policy.
Well, no, I can't necessarily off the top of my head, but I don't think that negates their support.
I think that's game, set and match. If somebody like you can't come up with one, I think we can safely say they haven't got any policy.
But 4.1 million people voted for them last time.
That doesn't mean they've got policies.
Of course it doesn't. But we're talking about the Labour manifesto being
but that's enough about the Liberal Democrats, Roger.
Well, on that point, I do have to. There was a report out today from the Electoral Reform Society reminding us that 42.6% of the votes in the last election did not go to Labour or Conservative, and there's 344 seats that are not Labour Conservative contests. Our first past the post electoral system is now utterly unsuited to the age we're in now, and it's one of the prime reasons why people are so disillusioned with politics.
But there was, and your party benefited from it, certainly as the Labour Party did, there was a huge amount of tactical voting this time.
But that meant people were not able to vote for what they wanted and get it, which is surely what democracy should be.
Leaving the ECHR, by the way, Roger, I've just remembered one, a reform policy.
Ian, just one thing to say, you talked about Downing Street being obsessed with reform. I think what the Labour government and the Labour Party do understand is that in the priority areas, if there is not change that you can see and feel, that the average person in crime, housing, hospitals, schools, then it opens the door for these very light in policy arguments to succeed. People have to. One of the biggest things all of us will have seen in the election is people just giving up on politics mattering at all. And that is where reform will thrive. And that is what Downing Street does understand.
Just before we go to a long overdue break, Natalie was talking about reforming party funding. Now, while we're on that issue, Kevin, you've had some news in the last week or so.
Well, I did. I mean, I'm after an interesting election and what's the phrase, a busy summer, to quote the Prime Minister. I was exonerated by the Gambling Commission of any suggestion that I'd ever cheated, and I was put back in the Labour Party. And as a result of my experiences in Central Suffolk and North Ipswich, I am strongly encouraging the Prime Minister every chance I get to introduce a bill that will ban political betting for anyone involved in politics, because I think it would help clear up public life a bit.
I've always had a self-imposed ban on that because I do regard it as insider trading. But on the other hand, I got a letter from the Gambling Commission on Friday, a cease and desist letter, because somebody had set up a user account on my West Ham blog from some illegal betting site. Oh, wow. They sent this awful letter, and I replied to it saying, well, of course I'll take it down, but do you have to be quite so obnoxious in the letters that you send out?
The Gambling Commission, Ian, is a disgrace of an institution, and I'll happily talk about that anytime.
Even though they exonerated you. It's 8:52.
This is LBC.
This
Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:54. Let's go to Rachel in Windermere, who says an MP has called for first cousin marriages to be banned in the UK. Excuse me. Due to concerns of greater birth defects, is it the government's business who each of us wants to get married to? Roger.
I really have no strong feelings on this subject. I don't think I know enough about it. I can see, under certain circumstances, yes, there might be a problem with inbreeding, and that might lead to potential birth defects.
I think 5% of first cousin marriages do lead to greater birth.
Okay, well, I'm informed, but I really have no strong feelings on the subject.
I did ask for shorter answers on this one. Kevin?
I agree. I think it's not something that should be encouraged.
That's even shorter. Henry?
I was reading about this earlier on because I was fascinated by it, and the first Archbishop of Canterbury in the 8th century banned people from marrying their first cousin, and it was only when Henry VIII wanted to marry one of his first cousins, they relinquished the rule and the law. So it seems to me inconceivable that is still allowed in the UK. I was surprised, and perhaps even more perplexed to see a British Member of Parliament suggesting that there was not that much wrong with it in Iqbal Muhammad. And so, yeah, I mean, I think Richard Holden...
But it is quite common in some cultures, isn't it?
It is, and Richard Holden, who proposed the bill, cited the traveller community and cited the Pakistani community, where he was saying it's 20 to 40% higher. So yeah. I do understand that there are cultural differences here, but...
Doesn't make it right, does it?
Doesn't make it right. And the stat that, just lastly, Richard Holden kept repeating was that it can double the risk of birth defects. Really? Double it. So I do think it's something which is bizarre.
Natalie?
Well, I think we need to take a public health approach to this and say what would be the most effective way to protect children from being born with birth defects if that's avoidable. And as I understand it, and I'm not claiming to be a great expert on this, there's lots of measures around the world in terms of counselling, in terms of testing beforehand, so people understand the situation and know whether they're likely to be affected or not. There's a lot of science here, and if that's the best way to protect people's lives, then that should be the approach taken.
So you wouldn't ban it altogether?
I think this public health approach seems to be the evidence is that's the best way forward to end up with the best outcome.
When the stats are there that it doubles the risk of birth defects.
But that's going to be, if you have the genetic testing, you will know whether you are at risk or not.
Why would you do it?
Why would it?
Does that answer come from the fact that there are, maybe in places like Oldham, a lot of your counsellors who are from communities where this practice is more supported?
No, it comes from the fact that we will always say, whether it's talking about saying the war on drugs has failed and we need a public health approach to problematic drug use, whether it's talking about knife crime, and there's been some very effective public health approaches to that. What is going to be the effective measure that's going to do the best thing to keep people safe? That is a Green Party philosophical approach.
But also, I think there's an impact on women here as well, in that a lot of arranged first cousin marriages are as such, and therefore are prohibitive for women's rights.
Of course, we've got to draw a line between arranged marriages and forced marriages, and we need to do much more to protect women from forced marriages.
It seems to me that there are two different aspects of this. One is the faith one, if you like, and people are pointing a finger in certain directions, which I don't find particularly palatable. But the other is that surely, there are communities within the United Kingdom that are fairly remote, where relationships are likely to be
that's enough
genuinely
about Ramsgate.
and literally. Thank you very much. I don't represent Ramsgate.
You can insult it then.
It's just nice for Iain not to have a go at Tunbridge Wells for once, Roger.
Okay, enough. Right, we have to end that discussion there, unfortunately, because we have to have time for our fun question from Laura in Hull, which yet again I haven't warned our panel about. The vast majority of young people say they'd prefer to have chips with their Christmas dinner this year rather than roast potatoes. Sacrilege. What would you happily swap out of your traditional family dinner, and what's going in instead? So 80%, while you think about your answer, 80% of under 34s say this, according to a chip company. Henry Riley, I imagine you like all the trimmings.
Yes, absolutely. I'm normally working on Christmas Day, but I do manage to squeeze in a Christmas dinner. Controversially, I actually think the turkey might be the worst part of a Christmas dinner.
Oh, no.
And so I would, if you're asking me honestly, I can happily leave the turkey for a few more pigs in blankets, cauliflower cheese perhaps, but well, I'm a big fan. So I would probably get rid of the turkey if I was given the choice.
Well, the good news is this year you'll be able to listen to me while you're cooking your Christmas lunch from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. on Christmas Day. Could you think of anything more festive?
And when you're eating it between 7 and 10 p.m, you can listen to me. So there we go.
But I won't. Kevin?
Well, the thing I'd like to get rid of, what's that thing, horseradish sauce? What's it called?
Lovely.
Yeah, I just don't understand what place that has in any...
But you wouldn't have that with turkey, would you?
No, it's on the trimmings, isn't it? It's part of it.
That's beef. I think that's beef.
No, you have it with beef.
Really? Okay, it was just a chance to address something.
Well, Natalie.
Well, I'm going to feed utterly.
I know what you're going to say. We have a vegan Christmas.
Well, it's not quite. I'm going to feed into the stereotypes, which is agreeing with Henry of the turkey. And I don't think most people would. I think a lot of people would get rid of turkey very happily. And I'm of course having a lovely nut roast.
I'm sure you are, Roger.
Lady Gale, who prefers not to be known as that, my darling wife Susie, is probably going to file for divorce after this answer. But every Christmas, Susie makes mashed swede and carrot, and I cannot abide mashed swede and carrot.
But I'm sure you've informed
the rest of the family. I have for 45, 36 years. Yes, I have. The rest of the family love it. But you said, what would we get rid of? I would get rid of swede and carrot.
Roger,
my mother would always put 2 Brussels sprouts on my plate for Christmas lunch, and every single year there would be 2 Brussels sprouts left at the end of the meal. And she'd do it again the next year and the next year.
Might need to get Sir Roger a hotel room, I think, after that answer. That'll be welcome.
Yeah, I know his wife Susie. I know his wife Susie, and believe me, she's going to get a locked door when he gets home tonight. Thank you all very much indeed for coming on the programme tonight. Much enjoyed it. On tomorrow's panel, we have the Labour MP Mike Tapp, campaigner and former Tory MP Joe Gideon, Reem Ibrahim from the Institute of Economic Affairs, and the Observer columnist Will Hutton. That's at 8 o'clock tomorrow evening on LBC. Now, we are going to return to the subject of Christmas now, and the subject of Christmas parties. I wonder how many people listening to this have got fond memories of Christmas parties or less fond memories, because there'll be people who have acted inappropriately at Christmas parties, and I wonder if you're one of them. Well, it could be that Christmas parties become a thing of the past, because apparently nowadays, if you aren't invited to your work's Christmas party, or a group of people exclude you from the work Christmas party, you can take your employer to an industrial tribunal. So just wait for employers to ban Christmas parties. Would you miss them if they did?
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From From Global's newsroom, Israel says it intends to establish a demilitarised zone in southern Syria to protect its citizens. The Israeli military has rejected suggestions of a deeper incursion as its tanks are drawing to within 15 miles of the capital Damascus. International correspondent Borzu Daragari has told LBC Israel's concerns are legitimate.
I could see